Hi, I'm Kara Lenorvitz, and I wanted to just give you a brief video tour of some of the science-specific technology that I have incorporated in my teaching, both in person and online, in order to broaden what students are able to do, what they're able to access, and how they're able to process complex concepts. Without a doubt, in science, hands-on learning is critically important, and it's challenging to do that sometimes even in person when you're dealing with very complex concepts, things that are either hard to see or hard to understand or are much, much larger than what you might be able to do in a typical classroom or during a typical school year. So simulations are a really excellent opportunity to do that. One of the simulation platforms that I regularly use is PhET. Within that, there are modeling simulations for everything from biology to physics to chemistry, and I've used each of them in my classes in various ways. In particular, one example of something that I've used from PhET, which allowed us to do a simulation online rather than in person, was this one on natural selection that looks at both the interactions between wolves and rabbits populations over a long period of time. Though there are ways to model this in person through some pretty fun games, this simulation actually allows students to track frequency of genes over many, many generations, something that wouldn't be possible in a typical school year. Other kinds of models that are also great are ones through Molecular Workbench, particularly in teaching chemistry. Chemistry is an incredibly abstract discipline for lots of students, and being able to make things visual and tangible oftentimes is the key to helping students put big concepts together so that they can both understand what they're reading and what they're learning about, what they might be doing in a lab, and then applying it in a new context. One of the ones that I've used a lot in Molecular Workbench has to do with intermolecular forces, so understanding how different molecules interact with each other. It's something that you cannot see at the macro level. You can experience, you can do measurements, but it's much, much easier when students have the ability to look at and examine the ways different particles might interact with each other. Though there are lots of simulation software platforms that are out there, and I'm always exploring and trying to find new ones that will be great fits for the learning that's happening in my classrooms, the two that I just shared are ones that could work whether students are in person or they're remote. In my current setting, teaching remotely through the Vermont Virtual Learning Cooperative, many of the simulations are actually built into the lessons that students are working with. This particular one is a simulation carrying out what is a very standard chemistry lab of heating magnesium ribbon in the presence of oxygen in a crucible until it reacts with the oxygen present to produce magnesium oxide. There are lots of different things that students can do with the data from this particular lab simulation. In this case, they were using it to model percent yield. So you can see that while it's not a perfect model of what it would actually look and feel like directly in the science lab, it gives students the idea or a sense of what kinds of lab equipment is being used, so that if they were going from learning in a remote environment to eventually learning in person, they might be able to translate some of those lab skills. It's not a perfect fit, but it's much, much better than not having a simulation at all. As well, I've definitely used lots of technology tools with students so that they are the ones that are actively collecting the data. I've had teams of students work directly with university level researchers to design an approved study that actually went through the formal research approval process at the university in order to collect public data or public perception data about stormwater pollution in our community. So in addition to having students model things with technology, technology also gives them the opportunity, whether they are remote or they are in person, to collect large data sets. And that's incredibly important in science. There's only so much data that you can collect from your immediate peers or within a class period or in class time. So being able to use technology to pull in greater data sets is a huge advantage and something that I routinely try to integrate. Similar to that, I have also used and taught myself and then taught students how to use things like the Agency of Natural Resources GIS mapping software. In this particular case, students were using it to delineate a watershed as part of an environmental science class. Again, the class was taught in person and we were going out and doing active fieldwork, but this process could be used just as effectively with students online so that they could compare the watershed perhaps of where they're living to the watershed of other students that might be in the same remote class. So to do that, students actually went through the process of how to use this atlas, which is a GIS software, to create their own maps. So again, here we have an opportunity of students expanding their ability to collect data. I do that as well. It's happened in person in my classes in the last couple of years, where students work with an Arduino programmed sensor, a little tiny thing like this, sending it straight up into the atmosphere with a weather balloon to actively collect atmospheric data. They use that data collection in order to actually understand the profile of temperature and pressure and humidity in the atmosphere before we headed into actually studying the atmosphere based out of a textbook. Again, this was something that happened directly. The students were there for the weather balloon launch. However, any student could access this data, and we used then graphing tools such as Google Spreadsheet and Excel in order to graph that data so that they could then start to visually see it. So again, I routinely incorporate technology within my classes in order to make some of the inaccessible more accessible. Along those same lines, again, I'm always looking for new opportunities to expand the technology skills that I'm bringing to my students so that they can further deepen their experience, was to learn about CodeApp. CodeApp allows users to take really immense data sets and put them into software that allows you to process and graph them in very quick time, something that would typically overwhelm a typical spreadsheet. In this case, I was working with the Lake Champlain Watershed Alliance, and we were teaching ourselves how to use this program in order to take the huge data sets from the State Department of Environmental Conservation water quality data and make some big comparisons between long-term data sets for one watershed compared to another. So adding this technology into the classroom, which was something I was hoping to do before COVID broke out, just magnifies the ability of what kinds of questions students can ask and what kind of answers they can derive by analyzing large data sets. So those are just some of the technology tools that are discipline specific that I have used both in person and have some applications online in remote learning as well.